screen that it's recording, and then make sure to turn it off, Rabbi, when you're done.
All right, John. All right.
Have a good class.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. So we're up to 3A3. 3A3.
Okay.
At the top of the left-hand column, 3 lines in. Okay, so does everybody have access to a text?
Can you say that
okay
again,
with that?
Rabbi?
What?
Yes.
3A3.
Yeah.
After the first 3 lines on the left.
Right after the goat.
Right? It goes, the
the
Gemara returns. Right? The Gemara returns to the verse. Okay?
Okay. Yes.
Very good. Okay, so does somebody want to volunteer, please, to read the next section? What we're going now is back to discussing the topic of the Megillah and the reading of the Megillah. And let me see if we have, yeah, okay, good. So the verse that was discussed before we got into the tangent of looking at all the different teachings of that sage or sages that went into other subjects, the verse that we were looking at before that was the fact that the reading of the Megillah needed to be done in each town and in each city, and so on and so forth. So that's the imperative that the Megillah puts forward, that created this ritual that we have now of reading the Megillah. So the verse is now coming back to be looked at some more. Okay, and who's going to read?
I'll read.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. The Gemara returns to the verse from the book of Esther that was discussed above. And now that you now that you have said that the words province and province, city and city serve as the basis for a derivation, what do the words family and family come to tell us?
Okay, so let's just refresh our memories. Let's look at note 29.
The first half of the verse reads, or the Hebrew is a little small for me, and these days of Purim shall be commemorated and celebrated in every generation and generation, family and family, province and province, city and city. The Gemara above expounded on the repetitious phrases, province and province, city and city. Here the Gemara will explain family and family.
Okay, so the verse...
I get the picture, the text, Rabbi.
You don't... The text is the same text we had last week.
Okay,
where
do I go to get it?
I sent it out in an email. I sent it out to you in an email.
Okay.
And I think it's also available in the Shomrei archive thing, but that's probably complicated. Go back to the email I sent last week.
Hey, I will do that. Thank you.
Okay, so now let's go back to this. So the repetitions, right? Medina, ir, va'ir, mishpacha, mishpacha. Right. These seem to be too much, redundancies. And therefore, we already talked about this before. This one is for a walled city. This one's for a not a walled city. This is for the 14th. This one is for the 15th. This one is for reading at other times if we have to. We already unpacked most of the phrases in this verse. And now the Gemara says, well, we're still left with one redundancy that we haven't justified. What is this extra statement coming to add or coming to emphasize? When you have repetition, a lot of times we think about it as an emphasis. So in what sense is this verse telling us something new? Okay, and here comes the answer.
The Gemara answers. Whoops, The Gemara answered. Rabbi Yosei Bar Chanina said, the intent of this phrase is to include the Kohen and Levite families, that they must abandon their sacrificial service and go to hear the Megillah reading.
What?
Keep going. For Rabbi
Yeah.
Yehuda said, in the name of Rav, the Kohanim engaged in their sacrificial service, and the Levites on their platform providing musical accompaniment to the service, and the Israelites participating in their station, attending the sacrificial service, and go to hear the Megillah reading. This was also taught in the Baraita. The Kohanim engaged in their sacrificial service, and the Levites on their platform providing musical accompaniment to the service, and the Israelites participating in their station, attending the service. All of them must abandon their service and go to hear the Megillah reading.
Wow.
Keep going.
Rabbi, I'm just going to, this is Stuart. I've had more experience with this the past week than I care to remember. If folks could just mute themselves if they're not reading or talking, it'll cut out some of the background interference. That's a suggestion.
Whoops. The rabbi just left.
No, he's probably there, but he probably muted himself.
No, it said he just left the meeting.
Really?
Oh. Maybe there's an emergency?
Maybe he just got dropped.
He's not on the list of people on the meeting.
So are you actually on your computer now? Because I couldn't get I had to do it on my phone.
I'm on my computer.
It's Sylvia. Can you hear me? I can't get it on my computer. I'm only on my phone.
Right.
Rabbi, you're muted.
Josie's on the phone.
Right. Rabbi, you're muted.
Okay, I
Is
just
anybody on video?
Yes, Sarita is on video right now. So
There you are.
I lost Sarita. Everybody froze on my screen, and I got out, and then I had to come back in. It was a little difficult. So I missed everything, starting from for Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Okay, so I'm sorry. Could we just back up there? Okay, and go.
Okay.
Can we?
It's about 5 or 6 lines into that paragraph.
Right. Okay.
Please repeat the page and the line.
3A3.
Thank you.
3A3, left-hand side. We're now in the middle of that left-hand column.
Okay.
The Gemara answers. You know what?
Right.
Let's start one more time from the Gemara answers.
All right. The Gemara answers. If you're going to ask me to do this 4 times like a Seder.
Yeah.
The Gemara answers. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, the intent of this phrase is to include the Kohen and the Levite families, that they must abandon their sacrificial service and go to hear the Megillah reading. For Rabbi Yehuda said, in the name of Rav, the Kohanim engaged in their sacrificial service, and the Levites on their platform providing musical accompaniment to the service, and the Israelites participating in their station, attending the sacrificial service. All of them must abandon their service and go to hear the Megillah reading. This was also taught in the Baraita. The Kohanim engaged in their sacrificial service, and the Levites on their platform providing musical accompaniment to the service, and the Israelites participating in their station, attending the service.
All of them.
All right. All of them must abandon their service and go to hear the Megillah reading.
Okay. So thank you. So this what we have here is we have a statement that is reiterated 3 times. First, we have Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina saying it. Then we have Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav. And then we have a Baraita. So we're going backwards in time. And we finally see that this is an early teaching. What is the teaching? The teaching is that the verse in the Megillah says every family must read the Megillah. And it says it in that doubled way, right? And family, right? Mishpacha u'mishpacha. Every family. So the Gemara asks, what is that emphasis about? What does it mean, every family? What families would we think would not have to read the Megillah? We're talking about cities and provinces. Everybody has to read the Megillah. So in what sense do we need to be urged to pay attention family by family? So the answer is, first by Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, there are certain families who might think that they have more important things to do than listen to the Megillah. What families are those? Those families are the priests. The priests are in the temple. The priests are doing the service in the temple, and the Levites are assisting them. So they also might think that they have overriding obligations that take them away from having to read the Megillah. After all, the temple service is a very important central ritual that binds the entire people of Israel together. It comes from the Torah itself. Reading the Megillah is a nice new ritual that was invented only a little while back. So, if we have something more important to do, then we don't have to do this. There's a rabbinic teaching, ha'osek b'mitzvah, patur min ha'mitzvah. If you're busy engaging in a mitzvah, then you can't be asked to stop that mitzvah to do another mitzvah. You have to do the mitzvah that you're involved in, and then afterwards worry about doing your next mitzvah. Of course, your whole day should be filled of doing one mitzvah and then another and another. But here, the priests and the Levites, these people are on call in the temple. So we might think, okay, so they have to report for work and do the service in the temple, and they don't have to listen to the Megillah. So now we have this very, very shocking idea that we read from this verse. No, drop everything, and even the service in the temple has to be stopped or has to be put second, and the priority is given now to reading the Megillah. This is a pretty drastic statement, and I think that that's part of why we have it said 3 times, each one pushing it back a little bit further. The earlier it goes, the more authoritative, of course, it is. And each time we have the statement that this is absolutely the case. We also have one more expansion in the discussion of the families when we get to this teaching as it goes down the line. And that is the Israelite, right? We had when we studied the Tractate Ta'anit, when we studied the Tractate Ta'anit, we learned that there was a system in place during the time of the temple where all over the country there were Israelites who gathered together to pray at the same time in synchronization with what was happening in the temple. The morning and the afternoon sacrifices, the daily sacrifices on behalf of all of the people of Israel, were accompanied not only by the people that were physically there, but also by people who were all across the country who then looked at their watch and they go, it's daybreak. It's time for the morning sacrifice. Let's all gather together and we will have our intention to imagine that we're there. Thinking about it now in terms of our own day where we have all of this virtual experience, they didn't have that, right? They didn't have the live streaming of the temple service happening. They nevertheless could conjure up in their imagination, in their own mind's eye, this is happening right now, 150 miles away. I'm doing this. It's as if I'm standing right there in the temple building itself. It's as if this is my personal sacrifice. So somebody please mute whatever it is that's ringing. So
if you're not speaking, please mute. There's just so much interference. Just turn off. Just put your mute on if you're not speaking.
Thank you. Okay, so the connection that was created was not created through technology. It was created through the human imagination and the human heart. But those Israelites were voluntarily doing this. You might say the priests and the Levites that were in the temple, okay, they had some kind of really important stuff to do. Then you have the Israelites who are all over the country who have volunteered to do this. And now we've expanded and we've said those volunteers who think that they have been, motivated by a tremendous sense of connection to the temple, you have to give up that sense of obligation right now because you have to go and listen to the Megillah reading. So again, the priests and the Levites have a true obligation to do the sacrifices. If they're not there, it's not going to happen. The Israelites are joining voluntarily. Sometimes, though, a voluntary sense of obligation is harder to let go of than a strict legal obligation. You're obligated legally, and then if somebody tells you, you know what, you're not really obligated legally, that's okay. And then you go, okay, and that's it. When somebody takes on something in a voluntary, self-generated way, it's often so important to that person for all kinds of reasons. Who knows the mysteries of the human heart? But as a result, it's not always possible for somebody to be told, you have to let go. You have to let go of this. And here the teaching is, yes, there is something now that goes and overrides this dedication that you have to the temple. And the point that we now have to all be at is go find a minyan where they're reading the Megillah and go listen to the Megillah. Okay, so this is.
May I ask a question?
Yes, so this is the now. Just hold on one second. This is how we now say when it says every single family in the verse, every single family must hear the Megillah. It includes the families or the constituted groups that voluntarily create their own sense of family. All of those families that think that they have something that is too important to give up. No, everybody has to give that up right now and listen to the Megillah. Josie, yeah.
My thought is that the book of Esther is not part of the Torah. And yet it's so important that you can leave your temple duties because you have to hear it. So it really seems to me to mean that it's more important than we ever gave it credit for.
Right. So this, it's pretty, as I said before, this is a very, very shocking statement.
Yeah.
It's very counterintuitive. And it brings up that question. How did they get to that kind of perception, or how did they get to that kind of decision based on that perception that the reading of the Megillah is so important that it even goes and overrides these kinds of Torah obligations. So
yeah,
we should know that because it is so shocking, because it is such a strong statement that goes against a lot of what we would think makes sense, there's some effort by many commentaries to sort of soften this a little bit. And the statement itself is, if we read it, let's read, Sarita, if you can, back to you. Just read Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina one more time.
Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, the intent of this phrase is to include the Kohen and Levite families, that they must abandon their sacrificial service and go to hear the Megillah reading.
Right. So the word in Hebrew is mevatlin, and here translated as abandon. We're about, in another little over a week, we're about to do the same thing to our chametz, right? This is bitul chametz. This is when we cancel our ownership on whatever chametz we have in our house. We look around, we find it, we get all the crumbs, we burn it, and then we say, look, anything that we have overlooked, anything that's in our house, if we haven't gotten rid of it, if we haven't sold it, if we haven't gotten it, dispensed with it completely, then mentally we are nullifying its existence. That's called bitul chametz. Right? For us, it's ka'afra da'ara. We consider it as if it's just dust of the earth. This is a statement. It's found in many traditional Haggadot at the beginning, and this happens. This year it'll be Tuesday night, right? Tuesday night, and then Wednesday night is the first Seder, right? So Tuesday night, when you go searching for the chametz, that's what you do. And then on Wednesday morning, if you burn the chametz, or if you flush it down the toilet, or do whatever it is that will finally get it out of your possession, you also say, I'm getting rid of everything that I know I have, and anything that I don't know I have, I'm getting rid of it mentally. That's bittul chametz. So here,
Sorry.
yes, Stuart.
Well, I have a question, but go ahead. Finish your thought.
Okay, so this is a complete relinquishing, a complete abandoning of any connection to the chametz that we have, and that's mandated by the Torah. So it's a very strong word. And here, that's what Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina is using to say that this is what the priests and the Levites have to do with regard to their sacred obligation to do the temple service. So it's really stark, and it's very much, it's something that somebody that cherishes this whole array of sancta, of sacred practices and rituals. It's very hard to hear that this rabbi is saying you just abandon it. So that strong statement is mitigated, as I said, by many people, and I'll talk about that in a second. Yes, a question.
Well, so I mean, there's a basic dynamic that I'm not getting here. So if you're in the provinces, the cities outside of Jerusalem, then it's saying, this is really important, and the community has to read the Megillah. But if you're in Jerusalem and you're within reach of the temple, I mean, why not just incorporate the Megillah service into? Why couldn't you do it in the temple? It just seems strange that there's a competition between the ritual of the temple and this separate obligation. That I mean, in our shul, when we're reading Megillah, we're not reading Torah, right? That's just how they're complementary rather than competing with each other.
Okay, so this is an important concept here, and this is actually going to become a very, very important discussion as we go further into 3a and 3b. The idea of competing values or competing rituals, sometimes they can compete. Sometimes they do compete. We know of competition between, let's say, our ritual life and our regular life. I have a business meeting. I can't go to hear the Megillah. I'm traveling. I can't go to hear the Megillah. So there's a competition between what do I do? Do I abandon my job, my work, or whatever else I'm doing, and go and listen to the Megillah? There we see the competition clearly. What the Gemara is putting out to us is that even in the choreographic richness and the beautiful way that everything is thought out in Jewish religious life, we actually can come into situations of competition between one religious obligation and another. And this is where the commentators start thinking, well, where is it? Why can't we have both? Why can't let them do their service, let them do the sacrifice, and then afterwards let them read the Megillah. Your question about why can't they do the reading of the Megillah in the temple, the problem with the temple is that the temple, we should remind ourselves again and again, actually it's very apropos to yesterday's Torah reading, the temple is not accessible to the bulk of the Jewish people. The temple is off limits to the Jewish people. So you can't have a Megillah reading for the community in the temple. You might have a private Megillah reading for the priests, but you can't do that either because the temple is off limits to any non-temple related activity. Anything that using the temple for anything that is not mandated by the sacrificial rites is considered the word is me'ilah in Hebrew, and it's hard for me to think of a good translation in English, but you're violating the sacred space of the temple. You're using it for something else, even if that something else is a mitzvah. You're not allowed to use this space for that. This space is a dedicated, that's why it's called holy. That's why the Holy of Holies is the Holy of Holies, because you can't do anything in there except once a year go in there for the Yom Kippur ritual. So the access in the temple is tremendously limited. And what is being told to us here is that the priests have to drop what they're doing in the temple and go find some other place to go read the Megillah. Now that takes time. So many people, and you have a whole note, and I'm condensing the note. Many people try to soften the word abandon, and they say, no, it doesn't really mean abandon. Abandon sounds like it's something absolutely total and forever. The word mevatlin. And what they're simply what they say is it means temporarily. Go read the Megillah and then come back and do the sacrificial sacrifice that you have to do, which is in the morning and in the late afternoon. Other people say that doesn't quite make sense, certainly in the morning, because the Megillah has a whole different time frame than the sacrifices. The sacrifices must be offered by a certain time of day. The morning sacrifice can only be offered in the morning. The Megillah can be read all day long. So they say, what's the problem? Let the priests do the morning sacrifice, and then on their break, let them go and then listen to the Megillah reading. It's not a big deal. But then what they say is, but what happens if it's in the afternoon? Let's say for some reason there was a backup, there were these things and that thing, whatever it is, all kinds of stuff came up, and they haven't yet gotten to read the Megillah, and the sun is about to set. And now they have a conflict. They have two competing obligations. The competing obligations are, I cannot at the same time do the sacrifice of the afternoon, the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim. I can't do that obligatory sacrifice on behalf of the entire people of Israel and still have time left over to read the Megillah before the end of Purim. What do I do first? So here we have this very shocking idea that, you know what? In this case, you're not going to be able to have both together. You're not going to be able to satisfy both obligations. One of these two competing obligations is going to win, and one of them is really going to lose. And then the question is, how do you weigh them? How do you actually decide which one comes first? Which one is, quote unquote, more important? How can that be? You know, we're always told, no, all of the mitzvahs are equally important. All of the values in Judaism, they're all essential. But now we have a very realistic question, a reality check. Look, our time is limited. Our resources are finite. When we can only get one of these things done, how do we choose? What is it that we're going to do first? So, or maybe perhaps not just first, that's one of the interpretations. We try to mitigate it. What happens if you can only do one? Mm-hmm. Which one do you do? Which one do you abandon? Okay.
Well, the Megillah only comes up once a year.
That's right.
So maybe that's the reasoning of, okay, that's the one that takes priority.
Excellent. So you're really now thinking into the guts of the issue, right? What then, if we have this statement again and again and again, if we have this statement that Megillah comes first, why? How? You know, how is it that we determine that Megillah has to be the priority? And again, just to lay it on thick, when Megillah is, as you said, it's not in the 5 books of Moses. It's not there. The daily sacrifice in the morning and in the evening is mandated, is obligated in God's book of the 5 books of Moses. And the Megillah is this Johnny-come-lately that was created by human beings without the mention of God in the whole book. God doesn't command us to celebrate the Purim. God doesn't command us, doesn't come out of a prophetic voice and say, okay, add this new holiday. We did it. So how can it possibly override the sacrifices? So now your point is, look, this is a once in a year opportunity. This is something that we can, if we miss it now, we miss it. Mm-hmm. Now, we've already, think back, we're only on page 3, but we've already actually seen that the rabbis knocked themselves out to make sure that people didn't miss this opportunity. How did they do that?
Well, they had public readings.
Okay.
So they
And what
make
else?
it accessible.
What else did we see from the page and a half that we've already read?
Is it cheating to
The
go
readings
look?
are the readings are held on different days depending upon where you
Right.
are.
According to one opinion, or according to a couple of opinions, but not the opinion that we follow now, they even stretched it to say, you know what? Let's even make it a couple of days ahead of time. You know,
Oh, right,
if
we
that's
had
the
all
only
that.
way that you're going to be able to get to read the Megillah, this is so essential, this is so important, this is so urgent that you read the Megillah, then let's, you know what, forget about the fact that it's, you know, the real anniversary is the 14th. Forget it. Read it on the 13th. Read it on the 12th. You know, let's just make sure you read it. So we see that many voices in the rabbinic system and culture were desperate in a certain sense to make sure that the Megillah would be read. So our question, and you're saying, look, we don't want to miss this opportunity. It's a once a year opportunity. So that's really special. But truthfully, it still begs the question, because even if it's a once a year opportunity, isn't it a secondary ritual? Isn't it a secondary obligation? You know, if I don't get to, I don't know what, I can't think of another secondary thing. I can't think of a good example, but I have primary obligations and I have secondary obligations. So in what sense is that secondary obligation, just because it's once a year, so much more special? So we still have to try to get to the underpinning of what this is about. So any other suggestions? All right, silence. So I think that the elements of Purim, we have to put them together, and we have to appreciate them for what they are in their paradoxical quality. In fact, Purim is the holiday of paradox, right? The holiday of reading a book like it's the Torah, even though it doesn't have God's name in it. The Megillah itself says it's the day where everything got turned topsy-turvy. We're the oppressed and the afflicted, and all of a sudden we become the victorious, armies that everybody's afraid of, when we always live in complete fear. So Purim is a day of upside downness. That's why we also have such a good time with parties and with costumes and so on. Nothing is what it seems. This upside downness is something that the tradition decided needed to be sanctified. Right? The push that the rabbis made to accept Purim as a full holiday, and I mentioned all the way when we first started studying this Megillah, this Masechta, this tractate, that the Scroll of Esther is the only book of the Bible which is not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which seems to indicate that there were very pious communities among the Jewish people that weren't so comfortable with acknowledging that Purim is a sacred day. They felt that it was maybe a little too Mardi Gras and too carnivali and too profane, and that's exactly the point. What the rabbis said was that moment that seems to be so coincidental, that seems to be so much just the way, hey, a little happy, fortuitous moment that God seems to be totally not present in. We insist that God is actually in there. I want to mention, for instance, that there's a custom that when we read the Megillah, one of the chapters starts Balayla hahu nadadash nat hamelech. Right, on that night, the king's sleep was unstable. He couldn't sleep, and that's when they bring out the book they say, okay, read me something. Maybe that'll put me to sleep. And they read to him that Mordechai saved the king's life sometime before. And the king goes, oh, so was anything done to thank him? And they said, no, nobody ever did anything to thank him. And then the king says, oh, you know what? Let's do something. And right at that moment, knock, knock, knock on the door. Haman wants to get the king's permission to hang Mordechai. And Haman comes in, and the king says, Ahasuerus says, you know what? I'm thinking I really want to do something special for somebody that's really, needs to be, given some honor. And Haman goes, oh, that must be me. And he says the whole thing about, let him ride on a horse and let him wear the king's royal garments and all that kind of stuff. And then the king says, that's a great idea. Take Mordechai, right? So that's the moment in the story where things switch. That's the moment in the story where everything starts reversing, right? Where the reversal of fortune starts happening. So at the beginning of that chapter, it says, Balayla hahu nadadash shnat hamelech. At that night, the king's sleep was uneasy. The word hamelech there is chanted, or that phrase is chanted, the same way that we chant the word hamelech, the king, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. When the Baal Shachrit is about to start the morning prayer on the days of awe, we go Hamelech, because we're putting God on a throne. Yoshev al kisei ram v'nisak. God is sitting on the exalted throne of glory. So we're announcing Hamelech. So the custom is then when we recite Balayla hahu, we go Balayla hahu, not the trop of the Megillah, but that chanting from Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we go Nadadash Nat Hamelech. The king's sleep started being disturbed. And who is the king? The king sitting on the mighty throne above. That's the king. So the king is alluded to, the divine king, the divine sovereign, God is then alluded to in our chanting, even though it's talking about that fool, Achashverosh. And that fool Achashverosh is a stand-in for God Almighty. So that kind of paradoxical, mind-bending mix of the ridiculous and the sublime is the message of Purim in a fundamental way, where we say, you know what looks like, what does the word Purim mean? The word Purim means lots, right? It means gambling. It means taking a chance. That's how Haman decided on the day that he was going to kill the Jews. He goes, let me just roll the dice and see what day comes out. He didn't care. It was all a matter of chance. So what the pushback of making Purim into a holiday is to say what everyone thinks of as chance is actually a miracle. Pirsume Nisa. The words Pirsume Nisa, to publicize the miracle, are famous, to make the miracle famous. We know that phrase from Hanukkah. And in Hanukkah, we say we have to light the candles, we have to put them in the window, people should see it. We say Hallel, because we want to publicize that God did this great miracle for us. But that was with a different kind of mindset, in a different kind of circumstance, where it seemed that God was more present. The original paradigm for this was Purim. Hanukkah comes after Purim, historically, and Hanukkah gets permission to exist because of Purim. When the book of Maccabees is sent out to the community and say, hey, we should celebrate this new holiday called Hanukkah, they say, after all, we celebrate Purim, so we should celebrate Hanukkah. So Purim is the precedent for this idea that human generated miracles are divine miracles. That the human participation in somehow muddling through, and figuring out how to actually, in the end, defeat the evil and protect life and goodness, that has divine sanction. That has divine support, even if we can't see it. That's the insistence of Purim. So all of the stuff that's in the Torah is the obvious stuff. God was booming out the voices from Mount Sinai, and it was with a generation that took for granted that God was a reality. And then we come to our time, when we take for granted that God is not a reality. God is a joke. But Purim is a holiday of jokes. And that becomes then so important, that Purim is the divine celebration of the joke, of the hiddenness of God, right? What is the protagonist, the female protagonist's name? Esther. Esther means hiddenness, right? In Hebrew, Hester Panim is the hidden face of God, right? So even though it comes from Astarte and so on, we make that kind of pun, and we say, yes, look how appropriate. So what we have here in this statement about how important the reading of the Megillah is an effort on the part of the rabbis to establish this very important perspective for people to learn. And that's why it needs to push off all the obvious stuff, because the obvious stuff, everybody will see it. Everybody knows it. The temple, of course, the temple is sacred. Of course, the sacrifices are important. Remember back then in the time of the sacrifices. So, but the idea that God is operating in the hidden cracks and crevices of our lives and of the life of the people of Israel in the diaspora. Purim is a diaspora holiday per se, right? This is, Hanukkah is an Israel holiday, but Purim is a diaspora holiday. Purim happened in Persia, not in the land of Israel. And that God is still there to publicize that is, for the rabbis, so primary and so essential and so important for constituting the new Judaism that they were creating, that they therefore say everything else takes second place.
Rabbi,
yeah.
I'm intrigued. I was actually going to ask you what came first, Hanukkah and Purim, and then I looked it up and I saw that in Maccabees they actually refer to the celebration of Purim. But it seems really interesting to me that when you're talking about that there were communities in ancient Israel who didn't want to celebrate Purim, but they did celebrate Hanukkah then. So, right? So that they didn't.
No,
they didn't.
The Dead Sea Scrolls communities are. I mean, they're not. We don't know anything about them celebrating Hanukkah. Hanukkah never made it into the scripture, so we don't have any records of them celebrating Hanukkah.
Oh, okay.
So we don't have that. So the real question is, what do they consider holy material?
Mm-hmm, okay.
Right? And Hanukkah was never in the running. We don't have any evidence that they lit Hanukkah menorahs. But that wouldn't be so surprising.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Anybody else?
Oops.
Okay. All right. So let's continue. We're at 3A3, the top of the right-hand column, third line. Based on this ruling. Sarita, please.
Based on this ruling, the Gemara teaches another law that pertains to the Megillah reading. The scholars of the school of Rabbi relied on the ruling given here that the temple service is abandoned for the sake of the Megillah to rule that one must abandon one's study of the Torah and go to hear the Megillah reading. This can be proven by a Kal Vachomer argument from the case of the temple service. Now, even if the sacrificial service, which is a stringent case, must be abandoned for the Megillah reading, is it not then certain that Torah study, which is generally not as stringent as the sacrificial service, is abandoned in favor of Megillah reading?
Okay. So this is now the opening paragraph for a long discussion here about balancing obligations and values, and trying to calibrate what is more a heavier obligation and a less heavy obligation. But we start out with the report that the school of Rebbe is also Rabbi or Rabbi, and this is Rabbi Judah the Patriarch, Judah the Prince, the official publisher, editor of the Mishnah. So he was, he lived at the end of the 2nd century CE, okay? And it's through his auspices that the Mishnah was produced. So approximately 200, 220 CE, okay? 150 years after the temple was destroyed. So we're no longer actually talking about, a real question, should the priests do the sacrifice or should they read the Megillah? But it's a teaching that was remembered. And then what the house of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, we imagine him, he was the political and religious, spiritual leader of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. He was recognized as such by the Romans, and that actually helped Rabbinic Judaism take hold, because he was then given the freedom and the support to push his brand of Judaism against other brands of Judaism that were competing at the same time, and eventually, the Mishnah and the Talmud and all of the heritage of Rabbinic Judaism that we have today was able to develop. So he must have, we imagine, had, when we say he edited the Mishnah, so the Mishnah is a huge piece of work. He didn't do it single-handedly. It means that he had a kind of an institute, right? And maybe an expanded set of committees, right? Here's a committee. You do, you got, your job is to come up with the Tractate Megillah. Your job is to come up with the Tractate Psachim for Pesach. Your job is to come up with the Tractate Shabbat. Your job is to come up with the Tractate Baba Kama on civil law. So he has basically a lot of scholars working under his authority, who are studying, producing, the same way that this Schottenstein Talmud was produced by a whole committee of rabbis that worked on the translation and the notes and the research and so on and so forth. So he's got all these people studying Torah night and day. We also have to understand that studying Torah night and day is one of the defining elements of Rabbinic Judaism. In the time of the temple, we don't have main figures of Jewish life as Torah scholars, right? When you after Moses dies, Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu, who's in direct communication with God. So you have prophets. Hold on 1 second. 1 second, please. Hi, I'm in the middle of a class right now. Can I call you back in 15 minutes? Okay, thanks. So the heroes that we have, the judges, the kings, the prophets even, they're never portrayed as sitting around studying Torah. They're doing whatever they do. Even if they hear God's word and proclaim God's word, that's not the study of Torah. That's, in fact, the proclamation of a new, hot off the presses, a message from God. So the idea that the Torah is something to be studied, to be interpreted, to be looked at, developed over time. Hanukkah is an important part of that process, and Purim is an important part of that process. The idea of taking human responsibility for the Torah, the whole idea of creating a Megillah, and saying, you know what, we're going to decide that this is part of the sacred scriptures. This is human endeavor that has no explicit, divine voice pushing it along. So the study of the Torah, the interpretation of the Torah, to sit here like we're doing now and just look over texts of the Torah and figure out what do they mean, what are they saying, does it make sense, what does it mean to us, that kind of engagement, Talmud Torah, the study of Torah, is basically the creation of Rabbinic Judaism. And the just as a side point, there's a story in the Talmud where the proto rabbis, the early rabbis who weren't called rabbis yet, the Pharisees, when they fought with the Sadducees, this was one of the things that they fought about. How much do we try to promulgate Torah learning among the people? How much do we want the people to be literate? How much do we want the people to be engaged in this? And the Sadducees were much more interested in just preserving the Torah as a priestly prerogative. Again, we've talked about this other times. For instance, in the Catholic Church was not interested in teaching everybody how to read and how to study the Bible. The priest had the Bible. The church had the Bible, not anybody else. So this was a kind of a priestly idea and they said the Torah is here, and if somebody wants to, come and study the Torah, well, we're not going to, stand in their way. But here it is. It's lying here in the corner. Anybody can come and get it. Now, for us, the image of the Torah, the image of the Torah lying in a corner is actually a horrifying image.
Yeah.
But for the Sadducees, what they're saying, it's not for public consumption. It's not something that we need to spread around. So
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
So Rabbinic Judaism, which today, with my Reform background, seems archaic and outdated, was actually pretty progressive and modern. It said, let's open things up.
Well, it was very, modern is a funny kind of word. It's a word that, can mean many things. They were activists. They were totally serious about what they were doing. They were very, very dedicated to all of the nuts and bolts of Judaism that Reform Judaism rebelled against. So in that sense, it was considered as something backward and primitive. To invest so much energy into these kinds of little details and arguments and rituals was considered not modern. But they were certainly very sophisticated on their own terms, and they were totally passionately dedicated to creating a different way of life that was all encompassing, that was all embracing. Right? You wash your hands, you make a blessing. You eat a sandwich, you make a blessing. You drink a cup of water, you make a blessing. You go to the bathroom, you make a blessing. In the morning, you pray. In the evening, you pray. It's like they created so many touch points for Judaism to be acted out. They took over the mundane, and that's very much in touch with what I was saying before. And we talked a little bit about it actually in the Pesach prep as well. They're taking over the mundane and infusing it with this kind of ultimate significance. So now, what these scholars in the school of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi have decided is we have to model for everyone how important Megillah reading is. And we have to, adjourn classes. We have to stop the academy. We have to stop the institution from doing its holy work, which they believed was saving the Jewish people. The entire future of the Jewish people depended on what they were doing. And they said, we have to stop all of that, abandon it for the sake of right this moment, today, reading the Megillah. And they said, this is the Kal V'chomer. Kal V'chomer means an argument from something lighter in weight to something that's more serious of weight. If something that is so serious, the case is such and such, then something which is not so serious, how much more so should the case be such and such? There's a ad manor. What is it from? Ad manorum ad majorum. Somebody knows these things. I think Mark Weinstein is on the phone. What's the or Stuart, you might know this. What's the Latin term for that kind of argument? Nobody knows. Okay, doesn't matter. All right. What?
A posteriori. Oh no, a fortiori.
Right, a fortiori. But then there's also this idea from the major to the minor, from the minor to the major, something like that. So the idea of how much more so. If that's the case, then something else, how much more obvious it is. So they said, look, if the priests are supposed to be letting go, abandoning temple service for the sake of reading Megillah, so how much more so should us, pure schmoes, have to stop the thing, even though what we're doing is sacred, even though what we're doing is holy, but it's not the same kind of thing like the Torah, like the temple service. So how much more so that we also have to abandon our studying of Torah for the sake of listening to the Megillah. Okay. So let's continue now, as is its wont. The Gemara is not happy with this. Go ahead.
The Gemara challenges this assumption that the sacrificial service is more stringent than Torah study. And is the sacrificial service more stringent than Torah study? But it is written, and it came to pass that when Joshua was in Jericho, he raised his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him, and he, Joshua, prostrated himself on his face.
Okay, so this, let me just hold on a second. This is an encounter between Joshua and an angel, right? And it's right. So this is right after the Israelites have come into the land of Israel, right? Joshua has inherited Moses' leadership. And just to bring this into, again, to our own moment, our own situation. And this is the time now where they get ready to celebrate Passover. And they haven't celebrated Passover for almost 40 years. They celebrated Passover, obviously, in Egypt when they were getting ready to be liberated. They celebrated Passover the next year, 1 year, the anniversary of the first liberation of the Jews. They celebrated Passover. And then it says here that now there's a mass circumcision campaign. And the book of Joshua says, and this is why Joshua circumcised the people, because all of the males who came out of Egypt, who had been circumcised, all died during the wandering in the desert. They all died during that 40-year period. And all of the people who were born in the wilderness, in the way after they left Egypt, they did not circumcise. Because for 40 years, the children of Israel wandered in the desert until that whole people, all of those warriors that left Egypt, who did not listen to God's voice, which God promised to them to not show them the land. Therefore, God promised that they would die, and He would give to He would fulfill the promise of giving the land flowing with milk and honey to their children. Right? But they were now all uncircumcised, because while they were traveling on the road, they did not circumcise them. They did not want to endanger them. Now that they had finally hit pay dirt, they finally crossed the Jordan, they finally are all circumcised. And then we continue. This is now verse 10. And then they celebrated the Passover on the 14th at night, right, on the banks of the plains of Jericho. And they ate on the next day from what was produced in the land, matzah and roasted corn. And on that day, the manna ceased. They were now able to take from the produce of the land. And that's when we now come to our verse. And then when Joshua was in Jericho, he looked up, and here was a man standing across from him with a sword, flourished in his hand, right? And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you one of ours, or are you an enemy?" And the man answered, "No, I am the warrior prince of God the Eternal, and I have now come. This is the moment now that I have come." And Joshua fell on his face on the ground and bowed and says, "What does my master want to tell me?" Right? And he says, "Take off your shoes from your feet, because this is a holy place." This is an echo, a repeat of the encounter that Moses had at the burning bush, and Joshua does this, and this is right before they're going into Jericho, and God says, "This is how you're going to capture Jericho, by going around and around the circuits until the walls keep tumbling down." So this is this awesome encounter that Joshua has. Okay, so now the encounter is going to be unpacked. What exactly is the significance of this angel coming to him at this point? And we will have to get to that explanation in a roundabout way, because the Gemara first goes on a tangent. Go ahead.
Before expressing its main point, the Gemara discusses Joshua's act of prostrating himself before the stranger. How could Joshua have performed this act? But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi...
By the way, so half a second, obviously a little echo of the Mordechai situation. Right? What does Mordechai say to Haman? "Who the heck do you think you are? I'm not going to bow down to you." Right? And yet here is Joshua, and the being that Joshua is bowing down to is, behold, a man was standing opposite him. Right? So what is that all about? Go ahead.
But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi has said, a person is forbidden to greet someone at night with the word shalom, because we are concerned that it might be a demon. Accordingly, it is certainly forbidden to prostrate oneself before a stranger at night.
Okay. So when you don't know who this stranger is, this is the way the Talmud is now framing it, and this stranger may be a demon, maybe a bad guy, so do not greet them with shalom. Shalom is a name of God. People that speak Hebrew, that are careful about using God's name, for instance, will not say shalom in the bathroom, in the restroom, because shalom is one of God's nicknames, not one of the 7 special names, but a nickname for God, a secondary name for God. And therefore, we shouldn't grace a bad guy with this name. So if a person is under suspicion, don't do it. So if he didn't know who this person was, how could he bow down to him? Gemara answers.
The Gemara answers, the case there involving Joshua was different, for the stranger had already told Joshua, "For I am an officer in the army of Hashem." Joshua thus knew that he was not a demon.
But his bowing down came after, not when the man was an unknown quantity, just a man, We use the word man also when Jacob wrestles with the angel. He's called a man. So here also, he wasn't just a man. He introduced himself after Joshua said, "Who are you? Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" And the angel said, "I'm an angel of God. I'm one of God's warriors." So of course that's why he's then bowing down. So now the Gemara parries the question. Go ahead.
The Gemara, however, asks, maybe the stranger was lying, and actually he was a demon.
Who can you trust? Who do you trust? Right? This is like a basic question, right? Who's fake and who's real? So just because the person said that they were a good guy, so what?
The Gemara answers, we have a tradition that demons do not utter the name of God in vain. Thus, since he said army of Hashem, evidently he was not a demon.
Okay. So this is a kind of a nice Purim kind of Torah. But there is also something in there that's an echo. Not echoing God's name, not saying God's name in vain. The word is levatala. Levatala is the same word that we used before for what we have to do for our sacred obligations that might be competing with reading the Megillah. Mevatlin. We make them nullified. We completely abandon them. We treat them as if they don't exist, as if they're not important. Here, we get this very interesting kind of observation about these demons, that even though they're demons, they don't mention God's name in vain. They don't treat God's name as if it's nothing, as if it's not significant. Again, a paradox, right? Because these are beings who are dedicated to completely undermining everything that God is trying to accomplish. But to use an English term, they are the loyal opposition, right? They're completely opposed to God, but they realize that they're actually locked in with God in a match that they have to respect their opponent. They have to understand that God really is God. Even though horrifyingly, their very essence is to be against God, but they're not denying that God is God.
There's honor among demons.
Honor among demons, absolutely. Right. Well, here it's not honor among the demons because God is the non-demon, right? So honor among demons is that they treat each other with respect. But here they also treat their main opponent with the utmost respect.
Does that also suggest then that a demon might do a lot of things to undermine people's confidence and trust in God, but demons would not go so far as to try to convince somebody that God doesn't exist?
No, that's part of their demonic shrewdness. They're never going to come out openly and say there is no God, but they would love for you to come to that conclusion yourself. Right? It's like a pusher who won't do drugs. Right? I'll get you to destroy yourself, but I can't deny the reality that I know. Right? So the demon will not be disrespectful to God per se, but the demon will do everything in an underhanded or sly or shrewd way to get human beings to abandon God. Yeah. All right, we still have a couple of minutes, so let's see if we can just move on to the punchline for this teaching.
The Gemara relates the ensuing conversation between Joshua and the angel, from which it proves that Torah study is more stringent than sacrificial service.
So let's remember, this is the zigzagging that we're supposed to be keeping track of. We had a proposition stated before that once we learn that the priests have to stop everything they're doing in order to listen to the Megillah, that means that Torah scholars or Torah students have to stop everything that they're doing and stop studying Torah, because if the priests have to do it, how much more so should the Torah students have to do so? Because the priests are doing something more important than Torah study. And if they have to stop, then of course, even lesser things like Torah study have to stop. Now the Gemara is challenging that and saying, okay, oh yeah, I'm going to prove now from this Joshua story that Torah study is the most important of all. Go ahead.
Okay. The angel said to Joshua, "This afternoon you neglected to offer the daily afternoon sacrifice, and now after dark you have neglected the study of Torah." Joshua asked the angel, "For which of these two misdeeds did you come?" The angel answered him, "I have come now, that is, for the sin presently being transgressed, the neglect of Torah study." Immediately in response to the angel's approach, the verse states, Joshua lodged that night in the valley. And Rabbi Yochanan said, this teaches that Joshua delved into the profundities of Torah law.
Okay, so this is the very fanciful way that the rabbis imagined this encounter between Joshua and the angel. And they read what the angel said, "Now I have come, atabati, I have come now." So apparently that means that something urgent has pushed the angel to, again, by analogy, drop everything and come and take care of this. So the issue is, what could be so urgent? What could be so special that the angel should stop doing what angels do in general and come here and now confront Joshua? So the answer is that actually the angel could have been upset for two things. The angel could have been upset because they hadn't offered the afternoon sacrifice, the sacrifice right before the evening, or the angel could have been upset because they had neglected studying the Torah. Remember, they're busy doing a lot of other stuff. They celebrated Pesach. And what the angel then says, according to this reconstruction of the issue, is forget about the fact that you didn't do the sacrifice. The fact that you didn't do the sacrifice, I get it. You're really overburdened. This is a whole new circumstance that you're in. Everything is changing for you right now. Who can keep track of all these things? I get it. But you didn't study Torah? That, of all the things, that's what you're abandoning now? How could you possibly? So that's why I had to rush now and to challenge you and to come and admonish you that you cannot afford to do this. If you want to continue in the campaign of what you're supposed to be doing as you came into the Holy Land, then do not think that you're going to get anywhere by abandoning the study of Torah. Okay, we have to stop here. I will pick up and continue looking at this and thinking about this some more. And I want to wish everyone a good week. Please remember, if you want to study some more Torah and also relate it to Passover, at 1:30, we have a special session with Dr. Joshua Kulp, who is the head of the yeshiva of the conservative yeshiva. Okay, I'm going to...
Dr. Koach, thank
all right,
you, Rabbi.
be well. Stopping the recording.
Stay safe.
Have a good week.
Everybody, this was fascinating. Have a good week. Stay safe.
Everybody stay safe.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you very much.